What's up, everybody? So after I did my review for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I actually got quite a bit of comments that were asking me what my favorite Tarantino films are and what do I consider to be Tarantino's best films. So I was like, you know what? I don't ever get to really talk about Quentin Tarantino on this channel. I think the only time where I actually talked about him was when I did my personal favorites list. But other than that, I don't really bring him up because he only makes a film every like 4 years, and I've only had this channel for like 2 years or so, and I just haven't got the opportunity to talk about him. So that being said, I'm actually extremely excited to finally be talking about Quentin Tarantino and his impact on my filmmaking journey and just overall film knowledge journey. So I think this is pretty obvious, but Quentin Tarantino was definitely one of those directors that were like in my starter kit in terms of me actually starting to pay attention to directors and appreciating the kind of films that they pump out. You know, around the time I was definitely getting into Quentin Tarantino was the same time that I was getting really into Stanley Kubrick, which I still am. Definitely one of my all-time favorite directors, if not still my all-time favorite director. David Fincher, I was also getting really into, you know, just those kinds of directors. Back when I was 16 or 17, I'm 25 now. But when I was around 16, 17, this is when I really started paying attention to directors. And Tarantino was definitely one of those directors where I started realizing, like, you know, the person that's directing the film has a huge impact on the quality of the film. And ever since I was like, oh, okay, Tarantino he did Kill Bill, cool. Oh, okay, he did Pulp Fiction, that's awesome. I kind of started just like connecting the dots, and I was like, you know what, let me just check out every film this guy has done, and I have yet to be disappointed by any of his films. So that being said, none of the films on my list are bad films. They're actually all good films. They range from either good to just incredibly outstanding. He's never, in my opinion, Tarantino has never made a bad film. He's honestly never even really made a subpar film. They're all either good or outstanding. So before I jump into this list, I want everybody to know that this list is what I think are Tarantino's objective best films. So, and I know that art is subjective and yada yada yada, but when I mean objective, I mean that I'm trying to take my personal favorite and my personal bias out of it and just trying to critique them on a filmmaking standpoint and just try to come up with what I think are his best films without my personal bias. But once I'm done presenting this list, I'm gonna run through what my personal favorites are just really quickly. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Oh, and just to let you guys know, I'm gonna be splitting up Kill Bill 1 and 2. I know that Tarantino views them as one film. I also view them as one film, but I think that it'll just make this list more fun and interesting, so just be prepared for that. Alright, so without further ado, let's just jump right into this list at number 10, which is Death Proof, which is part of the Grindhouse film and stars Kurt Russell. So I think most people saw this coming. I think most people would agree that this is probably his least favorable film out of all the films that he's made. But like I said, it's not a bad film. I think this is a good film. It has that Tarantino dialogue-driven style that you would expect out of his films. But just to note, I actually saw this film in completion with Grindhouse. So it's not like I sought out Death Proof separately and then only saw that. I decided that I might as well just watch all of Grindhouse and to see how I feel about it. So obviously that means that I watched Planet Terror, which is a Robert Rodriguez film. And yeah, that one was kind of difficult for me to get through because I just think Robert Rodriguez films are kind of hard to watch and appreciate sometimes. But I definitely think Death Proof was the stronger one out of the Grindhouse films, obviously. But that being said, yeah, there's a lot to love about this film, even though I think it's his weakest. A lot of women's feet are also in this film, which is not something foreign to Tarantino. Pretty much every Tarantino film will have close-up shots of women's feet. Anybody who is familiar with Tarantino knows that he has this kind of foot fetish thing, and that's fine, dog. You know, I ain't gonna judge you. Everybody's into what they're into. It's whatever. And Death Proof actually wasn't as violent as I expected going into it because, wait, actually, oh no. You know what? Never mind. Scratch that. I remember that one scene with the car and body parts going everywhere and that lady's head just getting crushed into oblivion. Never mind. There is some shit going down in this movie. I don't know how that slipped my mind for a second, but yes, there actually is some pretty disturbing and gruesome shit in this film. I guess just because it comes like in quick spurts that it just kind of left my brain, but no, never mind. This movie actually does have some pretty gross out, disturbing violence in it. But, you know, of course, the way Tarantino directs it, it's more entertaining and fun than it is disturbing. But really, my favorite aspect of this film has to be the third act car chase. I think the third act action sequence as a whole was just incredibly engaging and very well directed. And obviously probably took a lot of, you know, risky stunt work to pull off. And yeah, I wasn't really a fan of how it ended because it was just kind of goofy and abrupt. But then again, you know, it's Grindhouse. It's going to have that kind of B-grade feel, at least more B-grade than what you would expect out of a Tarantino film. So yeah, definitely not a bad film. Definitely good film. And every film on this list, I would recommend everybody to see if you haven't already. At number 9, we have Jackie Brown. So this is another one that I think a lot of people expected. I'm pretty sure most people going into this expected me to have Death Proof and Jackie Brown at the bottom of the list. But that being said, Jackie Brown is still a great film. I really enjoy this film a lot. It's filled with excellent performances. Pam Grier just does what she does best, which is being this badass, foxy chick. And I absolutely loved her character and her performance in this film. Samuel L. Jackson in this film is really interesting as well. Loved him. Robert De Niro's also in this, which is one of the reasons why I was really, really wanted to see this when I first saw it, because I'm like, Robert De Niro in a Tarantino film, I gotta check that out. That sounds exciting. And, you know, when I first watched it, I was a little disappointed with not his performance, but his inclusion into the story. But after a while, it definitely grew on me. And now I really appreciate his character more because, especially now thinking about it, he has this really interesting moment with a woman character in this in a parking lot. And I love that scene. That actually might be just one of my favorite moments in just Tarantino's filmography as a whole. Just because it comes seemingly out of nowhere, but at the same time, not really. But yeah, I actually loved his character and his performance. This is a pretty long film though. I believe it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes or something around there. But it's a pretty damn long film. I don't think the runtime is fully justified here. And I think it's one of the reasons why I do think it's kind of at the bottom, because I don't think the runtime is really justified with all the content that's in it. But it's still great. And there's a lot to really appreciate out of this. But I also remember the violence in this film to be toned down. Like, it's not as... I mean, definitely there's violence in it. You can't have a Tarantino film without violence. But there's definitely, like, the violence in this, I don't think is as intense as the rest of his films. But it's still present, and I actually kind of enjoyed, that there wasn't so much gross out violence in this, because it relied a lot on just dialogue and those really intense sequences, and also with its finale. And yeah, Jackie Brown, I think if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. It's worth checking out. Some people consider it, you know, to be in the top 3. I don't see how you could come to that conclusion, but, you know, some people really do like it that much, so I highly suggest checking it out. So at number 7, we have Kill Bill Volume 1. So Kill Bill Volume 1, I think, was one of the first Tarantino films I've ever seen. I think this is an incredibly entertaining film. Uma Thurman gives the performance of a lifetime in the Kill Bill series. Obviously, I think she ultimately shines in the second volume, which I'll get to later, obviously. But this is just a really fun, action-packed, entertaining film filled with violence that is both disturbing, but really more entertaining than anything. I think that the violence in this is just, yeah, it's brutal. There's a lot of decapitations and a lot of castrations and a lot of fucking just gross out blood and guts everywhere, but it's so cartoony and so animated that, like, it kind of makes sense for like a 13-year-old to watch this, because yeah, it's crazy with the violence, but it's presented in a way that isn't so disturbing. But the violence is definitely there. The fight scenes in this film are incredible. The big fight scene in the third act is absolutely incredible. The one-on-one fight with Lucy Liu's character is incredibly iconic. I love the music choice made there. I forgot the name of the song, but it's like a Spanish type sounding song. The soundtrack, it just fits so perfectly there. And you know, I hate to put it this low on the list, but he has so many great films that it's hard to put anything below this. So yeah, Kill Bill Volume 1, definitely a really fun film. And you know, in contrast to the second one, which is more the second one is definitely slower paced. It's more substantive with its story content and themes and all that. But Volume 1 is just like a really fun and quick movie to watch. Like if you just want to watch a quick, incredibly entertaining character piece, watch Kill Bill Volume 1. It's got the violence, it's got the dialogue, it's got incredible acting, the action sequences, the fighting is just off the charts. We have Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs, I believe, is Tarantino's first major film that he wrote and directed. So I understand that he wrote From Dusk Till Dawn, he wrote True Romance, which by the way aren't in this list because I'm only including films that he both wrote and directed. But Reservoir Dogs was the first film that he made that he both wrote and directed, and it just blew everybody away. The cast in this is incredible, by the way. Harvey Keitel, Steve Buscemi, Chris Penn, who is dead now, rest in peace, pretty awesome actor. Yeah, just a wonderful bill of people who all just give incredible performances in this movie. It's, by the way, Reservoir Dogs is one of those Tarantino films that are almost solely dialogue driven. Yeah, there's some intense sequences of action and violence, but I would say like 85% of this movie is purely dialogue driven between characters and how they interact with each other as they're trying to just unravel what the hell just happened at this bank robbery gone awry. And I just really love the character exchanges in this film. The performances are out of this world. Harvey Keitel is iconic in this film. Steve Buscemi as Mr. Pink, awesome character. I love that scene where they're trying to establish nicknames and they're all bickering at each other, especially Steve Buscemi because he got the color pink. Just awesome scene, fucking love it. And on top of that, it's just a really cool undercover cop movie as well. So if you don't even know who Tarantino is and just want to watch like a cool undercover cop movie, this would probably satisfy most people's needs because it really just dives in to the amount of dedication that someone has to have in order to achieve this level of being undercover. So yeah, Reservoir Dogs is an amazing film. Again, the violence in this is also pretty brutal. Everybody knows that famous scene where Michael Madsen, who plays Mr. Blonde, has that brutal scene with the guy tied up in the chair. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, even though I think you should have seen this film by now, but I hate spoiling shit for people, so I'm not going to go into it. But he has that iconic scene to where he's dancing to Stuck in the Middle with You. I think that's the name of the song. And it's just so brilliantly done, especially the long take that it's shot with, where it just follows the character outside and comes back in. I just love that kind of contrast that scene provided, to where they're inside and there's just some serious brutality going on in this warehouse. But then when he leaves to go outside, it's peaceful and quiet. You can't hear really anything except for, you know, subtle street noise. And I don't know, I really dug that scene. One of the more iconic Tarantino scenes for sure. And I think this one might be divisive in terms of where I've placed it on the list, because I can see people trying to place this within the top 5 or even the top 3, because there's some people who really love the shit out of this film. And I can really see why. I really do. I just think that, again, if I'm comparing it with his entire filmography, I just don't think it compares in that way. But either way, it's a wonderful film. You need to check it out. It's not like you should maybe. You need to check this film out. I think that if you're just a film lover or trying to go into filmmaking, you can really learn a lot from this film. So, hell yeah. That's why it's number 7 on my list. At number 6, we have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is a film that I just finished watching a few days ago. I already reviewed it, so if you want to get more in-depth thoughts on that, you can check out my actual review for that. So I won't really spend too much time talking about it here, but just know that I do think it's a pretty great film. At first, with its first 2 acts, I thought it was just okay. Like, I thought that this was gonna be, like, the only subpar Tarantino film that I've seen. But the 3rd act just brings everything home and really wraps the film up in a really climactic way that was incredibly entertaining. Also violent, also just flat out hilarious. I mean, the 3rd act to this, like, I definitely expected to get some sort of climactic scene out of a Tarantino film, but the way that it just executed its entire 3rd act in terms of its climactic scene was just incredibly impressive. Especially with how they incorporated the pit bull was just like, I don't even know how they were able to film it that way, but it was incredibly brutal and hilarious. Brad Pitt's character too, just overall in the entire film, I thought he gave an excellent performance. And again, his character, I really loved what he represented as a character in Hollywood. Same with Leonardo DiCaprio, gives an excellent performance. I really hope that at least one of them gets nominated for a Best Actor Oscar, which I'm sure is not too far from being possible. But yeah, this is filled with incredible performances. The only reason why I wasn't too super astonished by it was because I felt Margot Robbie's character was underutilized and thought that she could have been incorporated in the film a little bit better. But, you know, to kind of give it a little bit more leeway, it does incorporate a character at the very end of this film that kind of has a thematic element to it in terms of, how connections work in Hollywood and what can just happen out of random and how things that you think are random end up connecting by the end of it. And, you know, I'll give it some leeway there, but I still think that at the end of the day, did we really need to have an entire segment of Margot Robbie's character watching herself at a theater? I don't know. It just seemed to have really long lingering moments with her that didn't really serve much for the story or even too much for her character either. And also the amount of feet in this film is funny, but also a little annoying because the way that Tarantino incorporates it in the film, like, to me, it just didn't even seem subtle at all. It's like he did that completely on purpose because he knows that some people are annoyed by it and he just kind of like blew all that in their face. And whatever, you know, that might not be a real issue. It's not even a real too big of an issue for me, but I was telling you like it is, and I remember being in the theater just being slightly annoyed at it because it was just kind of like, it's kind of like I feel like Tarantino, whenever he starts getting criticized on something, he just starts doing more of it. Like, I remember before Django Unchained came out, he was being hugely criticized, you know, for using the N-word way too much. And then he comes out with Django Unchained where literally like every 2 seconds someone's saying the N-word. And here we have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where, you know, a lot of film lovers are talking about how annoying he is with this whole foot fetish thing. And here he goes, just putting that right in your face in the film, and whatever. Like, again, it's kind of more funny than it is annoying, but I do remember being just a little bit annoyed at it because it wasn't subtle for me. It was just so in your face. But it's still a great film. I really enjoyed it a lot, and that's why it's number 6 on my list. So at number 5, we have Django Unchained. So Django Unchained is a film that I personally just love so goddamn much. But I do think that Django Unchained is probably his most popular film. Even more popular than like Pulp Fiction or Inglourious Bastards or maybe even Kill Bill. Because it's really hard to come across somebody who hasn't at least heard of Django Unchained. And most people have seen it. Like, most people, even if you're not a film lover, like, you've seen Django Unchained. And honestly, rightfully so. It's an incredible piece of filmmaking. Christoph Waltz in this film, I'm so happy that he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor because he truly deserved it for this film. His character in this film is so touching and so charismatic. You just gotta love his character. Jamie Foxx in this film did surprisingly well as well. And yeah, I also really dug the revenge element of his character and the kind of justice that he's out to pursue. And yeah, really dug that. And of course, Leonardo DiCaprio in this film gives, in my opinion, an iconic performance and maybe one of the better performances overall in all of Tarantino's filmography, because Leonardo is just absolutely incredible in this as Calvin Candy, the plantation slave owner. he just has these incredible sequences where the intensity of a scene solely relies on his acting and his believability. And there's also so much violence in this. This film is just riddled with just really fun, entertaining violence. Like, most of the violence in this isn't brutal. There are some brutal moments, but most of it is just really crazy, fun to watch violence, where people's blood are apparently have the same thickness as water. I don't know, obviously, but the violence in this is very animated in the same way that it was animated in the first Kill Bill, but incredibly entertaining. There's some shootout scenes in here that are just so fun to watch because it's incredibly well directed and well acted. Kerry Washington was also really good in this film. Definitely believable as her character. She had to really portray some intense anxiety moments in this film, and I think that she did an incredible job with that as well. And yeah, honestly, the only reason why this film isn't perhaps higher on the list is because I think the third act of this film, after the big shootout happens, it feels like it's just kind of meandering. Like, it doesn't feel like it really needed to go this far and do this. It just seems like really, it's not bad or anything. It just feels like maybe it could have been a bit more creative or cut down, because it just drags, it feels like it drags out a bit too long, and just goes to where you pretty much expected it to go, because it's a revenge movie and that's all that happens afterwards. But that being said, this is still an incredible piece of filmmaking. I personally love this film so damn much. And yeah, I'm happy that Tarantino won for Best Screenplay and that Christoph Waltz won for Best Supporting Actor, because they were both very well-deserved films. So that's why it's number 5 on my list. So at number 4, we have Kill Bill Volume 2. So obviously, like I said, I split up the Kill Bill films, and I just think that Kill Bill Volume 2 is objectively better than the first one, just because there is so much more substance in it, and it's longer, which means that it has a lot more to convey and a lot more to really give audiences. And Uma Thurman's performance in Kill Bill Volume 2 is out of this world. I mean, she gives the performance of a lifetime in Kill Bill Volume 2. I don't know who won Best Actress that year, but I don't know if Uma Thurman did or not. I really don't know, but I doubt it. But I think that she probably would just deserved it, because I think that her performance in this might be at least the top 3 best Tarantino performances I've ever seen, because she was just completely dedicated in this role, and she conveyed all the emotion so genuinely, and you really feel for her character this entire time. Especially when certain revelations come up in the third act. It's just really, not only is it just a fun, enthralling piece of filmmaking, but it actually gets pretty deep and emotional in the third act. And it's, I don't know, I just think this film is pretty brilliant, and I've seen it so many times, but it just never gets old for me. The fight scenes in this film as well are just so incredibly entertaining and brutal at the same time, especially with the one she has with Black Mamba, I believe her name is, her nickname. I love that fight scene, especially the way it ends. It's just so funny and brutal, and I just love it. I think it's incredibly genius action writing. And yeah, I love the hell out of this film. It also does a pretty damn good job at subverting what you would expect too, because there's scenes where you would expect Uma Thurman's character to prevail, but then like within seconds she's underground. And I really love how the film kind of plays with your expectations that way. And overall, again, and also the way it concluded with Bill, I don't know, I love it, because it was Tarantino, I think, being a bit subdued, like just a little bit, because the way that the fight concludes with Bill, I can see people finding a bit unsatisfying, but I personally love it. I love how it was able to wrap itself up in that way that wasn't too showy, because most people would expect this, huge, drawn out fight sequence, especially if the name of the film is called Kill Bill. You would think that would be a gigantic, crazy fight, but it's more of just a really deep character exchange with a quick kind of fight at the end. But I loved every second of it, and I was just really impressed with the way Tarantino was able to convey its third act and wrap up the film. And I'm not sure if he's going to make a volume 3 at this point. It's just a bunch of rumors. I don't know what the hell's going to happen with that. But I absolutely love Kill Bill Volume 2. I think it absolutely deserves to be in the top 5 objective best Tarantino films list because it's just, it exceeds on almost every level, and I absolutely love it. So at number 3, we have The Hateful Eight. So The Hateful Eight, I think, is one that is definitely going to be more divisive because I've talked to quite a bit of people about this film, and some of them actually think this is one of his weakest films. Like I know people that would probably place this near the bottom of the list. And honestly, I couldn't disagree more. I remember seeing this film for the first time with the Roadshow edition in theaters, and I was extremely excited to watch it because I've heard so much about it. Tarantino was having problems with his script being leaked, and I don't know, there was just so much hype for this film for me. And going into it, I had just mammoth expectations, just gigantic expectations. So when you have expectations that are that gigantic, it's almost destined to let you down. But for me, it met those expectations. Like, it met them, and they were like literally impossible to meet at that point. And I absolutely loved the fuck out of this film. Every character in this film is absolutely entertaining, and they all give incredible performances. It's a 3-hour film, and Tarantino is able to engage you throughout the entire thing with pure dialogue. Only like 10% of this movie is like action violence, but the rest is just purely dialogue driven. And I just think it was just so impressive for him to be able to engage an audience for 3 hours with just dialogue and character exchanges. The dialogue in this and the situations that are put in are just so engaging. It's hilarious. It's intense, especially with Samuel L. Jackson's character when he tells his story about what he did to that guy's son. That was just such an iconic moment for me. It was just so, I remember just laughing my ass off and having my jaw on the floor. And for me, it's definitely one of the better Tarantino moments in all of his filmography. Just so outrageous and so hilarious, but also brutal at the same time. Jennifer Jason Leigh also just gives a performance of a lifetime in this film, especially with this long monologue that she has in the third act. She's just absolutely incredible at portraying this character. I believe she got nominated for this. I'm not 100%, but I think she did get nominated. She didn't win, obviously, but she definitely deserved the nomination because, again, she just knocked this role out of the fucking park. And yeah, even Channing Tatum in this film. Like, Channing Tatum shows up eventually, and I really dug him a lot. And, you know, it's just crazy because when people say that this film was one of his weaker ones, I'm still having trouble figuring out why that is. Because none of the reasons that they gave me I agree with, because they tell me like, oh, the dialogue wasn't strong, or the plot just felt aimless and redundant, or the use of the N-word was just overbearing, even though they're in like Civil War times or close to Civil War times, and you know, obviously that word's getting thrown around like crazy. But I don't know, it's just every phase of filmmaking impressed me. The cinematography was outstanding. The score to this film was absolutely immersive and fitting for what it was going for. The acting, the performances are just out of this world. The writing and the dialogue is just so incredibly engaging and entertaining and hilarious. Yeah, this film just has everything going for it, and I absolutely love it. So that's why it's number 3 on my list. So at number 2, we have Pulp Fiction. So I know a lot of people probably expected this to be number 1 because it's most people's number 1 when it comes to making an objective best list. But I have number 1 for something else, which I'm pretty sure most people already know by now because through deductive reasoning you know what it is. But let's just save that for later. Pulp Fiction. Excellent piece of filmmaking. Every phase of filmmaking of this film is essentially perfect. The direction is perfect. The story writing was unconventional, but yet so fitting for what it was going for. The performances were incredible. Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta just give one of their more iconic performances that they've ever had, especially Samuel L. Jackson. I'm not 100% on this, but I'm sure that this was Samuel L. Jackson's breakout performance. And, you know, after seeing it 10 times or more than 10 times, it's very clear that the recognition that he got from this film is very well deserved, because his character in this is so incredibly believable. He's so entertaining in this. Even John Travolta is really entertaining as his character. Uma Thurman in this film, her place in this was also like, the thing about this film is that it's incredibly iconic. Like, everybody knows about Uma Thurman's character and what happens to her. Everybody knows about Samuel L. Jackson's character. Everybody knows about Bruce Willis's character and and the whole fiasco he goes through. It's just such a incredibly iconic movie, and for good reason, because the way that Tarantino wrote these characters, they're so stand out, and they're also slightly relatable in a weird way. And the comedy in this is just so pitch perfect, because it goes from just silly comedy to just incredibly dark comedy. And I just love films that are able to really hit home with their comedy. Tarantino's a brilliant comedic writer. I mean, he's a brilliant writer to begin with, but he's really good at writing comedy. But yeah, Pulp Fiction is an excellent film. I've seen it so many times, but it really never gets old. I guess if I had to find something about it to criticize, I think maybe the segment with Bruce Willis and his girlfriend and the golden watch. I think that maybe that could have been trimmed up a bit, and maybe it didn't really have to be as drawn out as it was. But at that point, I'm really just kind of nitpicking to give an excuse as to why I put my number one where it is. But either way, gotta love this film. And anybody who doesn't like this film, you should probably question how you even got to know that person, because it just makes absolutely no sense why anybody would not like this film. I've seen it so many times that I can pretty much recite this entire film just from pure memory. And yeah, incredible piece of filmmaking. Everybody needs to see this film. If you call yourself a film lover and you somehow haven't seen Pulp Fiction yet, you are doing a complete disservice to yourself. You need to watch Pulp Fiction. It's an incredible piece of filmmaking. I can't say that enough. Watch it if you haven't. Do it. So here it is. Time for my number one. Everybody pretty much already knows what it is by now, because it's impossible to not know what it is at this point. So without further ado, my number one is Inglourious Basterds is what I think is the number one objective best Tarantino film. This film, very much like Pulp Fiction, exceeds on every phase of filmmaking. All the way from the way it opens up with Christoph Waltz's Hans Landa character, which is incredibly iconic and he won an award for, rightfully. From that very amazing first sequence all the way up to the very end, it is just a non-stop, engaging thrill ride. Everything feels so incredibly purposeful for its pace and the way that it's trying to tell its story. Even the side characters in this film, with Shoshana, who works at the movie theater, I guess she's not really a side character. I guess she kind of is a central character in a way, but her character and what happens with her and her entire context and situation, I thought was, one, it was well established in how it connects with Hans Landa's character, but also just as a whole, I thought just concluded in an incredible way. I love the way this film wraps up, and it's just so incredibly satisfying to see what goes down in this third act. I mean, who the hell wouldn't want to see a bunch of Nazis getting locked in a movie theater while it's burning down and having someone from the top balcony just go and just completely annihilate them like fish in a barrel? Like, it was just visually and aesthetically pleasing just to see something like that go down. Even if it's fiction, it's just so entertaining and so satisfying to see that. But yeah, every sequence in this movie is absolutely stunning. I don't even know which one's my favorite because I just love them all so much. But if I had to pick one, I think one of the better sequences in the film occurs, I believe, in the second act, where Michael Fassbender's character goes undercover and tries to have this rendezvous to try to get some secret information. That entire sequence was just incredibly well written, incredibly well acted, and incredibly well directed. I mean, and the scene goes on for a long time. I can see some people saying that it's a bit drawn out and it shouldn't go on that long, but I personally don't think so. I think that every second of that scene is incredibly purposeful for what it's going for. And just the way it all plays out, it's just incredibly intense. The whole thing, and it's basically all dialogue driven. Again, Tarantino shines the most when he has dialogue exchanges. And that entire sequence is just so, it never gets old. I've seen it so many times, more than I can count on two hands, and it never gets old. It always gets me. It just gets me so engaged and immersed in what's happening. And yeah, I just gotta fucking love it. And by the end of it, it just gets so brutal, gives you that awesome Tarantino violence that you would want out of a Tarantino film. And it just delivers. This entire film just delivers on every single phase of filmmaking. And I appreciate this film so much. And it's not my personal favorite Tarantino film, but I do love the hell out of this film. And I do think that it's Tarantino's objectively best film that he's made so far in his filmography. But before I stop talking about Inglourious Basterds, my favorite Christoph Waltz scene in this entire film is not the first one. It's not the first opening scene, even though that's an incredible scene. But I just love the interaction that he has with Shoshanna's character in that diner or that restaurant when he's eating dessert. That entire scene was just so internally painful, but also incredibly immersive and engaging. Like, definitely one of the best sequences in all of Tarantino's filmography. And again, one of the better performances out of all of filmography when it comes to Christoph Waltz's character. His character in this with Hans Landa is just on a whole other level. I'd definitely say it's probably top 3 best performances in all of Tarantino's filmography. But yeah, this film rocks. It exceeds on every level, and that's why it landed at the #1 spot on the objective best Tarantino films list. Well, alright, there it is, you heard it. Those are the films that I think are his objective best in that order. So now, let me go into what my personal favorites are. I'm just gonna run through them really quick, okay? So, number 10, Death Proof is the same. Jackie Brown, number 9, the same. Reservoir Dogs, number 8. Kill Bill, number 7. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, number 6. Pulp Fiction, number 5. That might surprise some people. Django Unchained, number 4. Kill Bill Volume 2, number 3. Inglourious Basterds, number 2. And The Hateful Eight at number 1. That might surprise a lot of people, but for those who watched my personal favorite films list already, that might not have been as surprising because I've had to pick one Tarantino film and I put The Hateful Eight on there. But yeah, I personally love The Hateful Eight. It's definitely my personal favorite of the Tarantino films, mostly because I kind of had a connection with it because I saw it 2 or 3 times in the theaters. And also, I just think it's a stunning film on every phase. And I just love the characters and the dialogue that goes on in this film. It's incredibly engaging, as I mentioned. So yeah, those are my personal favorites, aside from the objective favorites. Some of them actually land on the exact same spot, but some of them are actually quite different. But yeah, I guess that's it. Let me just shut the fuck up because I've talked way too much in this video. You're probably incredibly tired of hearing my voice and how annoying it is. So I just want to thank everybody so much for clicking on this video and hearing what I had to say about Tarantino films. If you really enjoyed what I had to say, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.